I'm Dr. Neil Cox from the University of Reading, and this is the fifth of my talks about the uncanny. In the last talk, I told a story, and that story kind of revolved around the idea that although we might think that what determines who we are is, say, our psychology or our desires, something really intrinsic, actually there are occasions when it's clear that what determines us is something external. Sometimes something irrelevant or meaningless. And I guess one of the things that I was trying to offer up there was the idea that what determines who we are sometimes is our place within a narrative. But there's something else going on there as well. It's what I talked about when I said the joke has come upon me. And it's that sense of finding oneself in a position which one intended for someone else, let's say. Here I remember quite a few years ago now, there was a classic kind of Doctor Who, Matt Smith episode called Planet of the Ood. And the Ood were these kind of sort of slightly H.P. Lovecraft looking strange aliens, tentacles, they were bald. And they were treated as slaves. And there was this horrible slave master who was being right nasty to them. And he thought the stress of being nasty to his slaves was what was driving him to drink and making him bald. But actually it was the drink that was making him bald, because the drink was being given to him by his personal ood slave. And the drink was kind of ood juice, I guess. And it turned him into an ood. And that's why he was going bald. And of course there's this final horrible moment where it's kind of revealed that he's, what he has become. And it's a very uncanny moment that, we think about clear distinctions between things, but suddenly one finds oneself over there. And I think that's something that has real sort of pertinence to what we do, as literary critics, because often I think too often, we're kind of confronted by literary texts, and what we do as critics is we kind of delight, and guilty as charged, in drawing out what is absurd or illogical about them. We kind of master literary texts and show them up for what they are. But often something happens at the very moment of our triumph, when we sort of, when we've really seemingly mastered the literary text that we're reading. And that is bizarrely our language, or something about the way we're arguing, repeats the very foibles that we are locating. We kind of perpetuate the very errors that that is our mission, apparently, to locate. And that's a very kind of humbling thing, but it's also a very sort of delightful thing, I guess one of the reasons for it is quite simply that what we do in literature is that we use language to analyse language. And there's always going to be a slight sense of repetition in that. If we turn to, and here I'm following a reading by Nicholas Ryle in his fantastic book on the uncanny. But if we turn again to Freud's 1919 text on the uncanny, we can see something like this happening. You know, he sets out to kind of offer a rationalistic and scientific assessment of this weird feeling of the uncanny. But in doing that, he produces a very strange and uncanny text. His kind of text of mastery over this strange psychological problem ends up as being readable as an instance of that problem. And here I'm going to turn to a quote, and I'm going to put this up so you can read it and rewind back if you need to follow it. The writer of the present contribution, indeed, must himself plead guilty to a special obtuseness in the matter, and this is the matter of understanding the uncanny, where extreme delicacy of perception would be more in place. It is long since he has experienced or heard of anything which has given him an uncanny impression, and he will be obliged to translate himself into that state of feeling and to waken in himself the possibility of it before he begins. So, in one sense, what Freud is saying here is that, look, I know nothing about the uncanny because I'm not kind of strange like that. Yeah, I may have had that feeling when I was young, but I'm a rational man of science, and you know I'm not best qualified for this because, to be honest, it's weird, and I'm not weird. But actually, if we read him closely, there's some pretty strange stuff going on here. The writer of the present contribution, that's kind of himself, but it sounds like he's talking about someone else. The writer of the present contribution, indeed, must himself plead guilty. The must, the modal, there's something like a compulsion there. There's a sense of him not entirely being in charge. And that compulsion is linked to a sense of guilt, and also the compulsion is to plead guilty, that there is a necessity to announce a sense of guilt. Must himself plead guilty to an extreme obtuseness in the matter, where extreme delicacy of perception would be more in place. So here there is a sense of what is right, what is proper, what should be in place. And because the writer of the present contribution is not doing this, there's a sense of the writer of the present contribution not quite being in place. And that sense of an uncertainness of place I read also in the way this identity, the writer of the present contribution, is split. So, for example, it's long since he has experienced, he has experienced or heard of anything which has given him an uncanny impression, and he will be obliged to translate himself into that state of feeling. So, the he here, and the he is who the writer is referring to as himself, is someone who's going to have to act on himself in the future. He will be obliged to translate himself. There's this auto-translation. But that means that for all the rest of the essay, the writer isn't quite himself. The writer has been subject, or will be subject, to translation. And it gets weirder still because he's obliged to translate himself into the state of feeling and to awaken in himself the possibility of it before he begins. Now, this bit is from near the start of Freud's essay, but it's not right at the start. The essay is clearly already begun. So even though this is about a future translation of himself, and this is all about preparing, there's also a sense in which this process has of necessity already begun, because this has already been written. There's a difficulty with origins here. It's a writer writing about how he's going to begin as a writer. So what we've got here is not a secure sense of self, but a sense of self that's curiously doubled. The self is someone else. It acts on itself. It isn't itself because it's been subject to translation. And it's subject to compulsions and a sense of guilt. And within this, there's a troubling of origins. There's a doubling of origins, actually. And all of these difficulties, the doubling of origins, the splitting of the self, this notion of compulsion, the idea of being other than oneself, these are all very, very uncanny things. And what is exciting to me about this is that it's at the very moment that Freud can be read to really distance himself from this project and to not know the uncanny at all, and to say the uncanny is something very foreign to me. That he's actually perpetuating something that's intimately close to the uncanny.